All right, welcome. Thank you for joining us for ArcGIS Pro SDK for .NET, UI design, and MVVM. My name is Wolfgang Kaiser. Here's Uma Harano with me. We are both working with the Pro SDK team out of Redlands, California. And as you're aware, you can use GeoNet if you have any questions when you work with the Pro SDK. And we are usually answering your questions virtually immediately, right?
Yes.
Yes. So a quick session overview here. Before we go into the user interface and MVVM, we'll talk about asynchronous programming. We give you an introduction to QTask. I'll explain about that a little bit later. The use of async and await. Authoring custom asynchronous functions. Then we'll give you an overview of MVVM, model, view model. We show you by example using a doc pane. We show you how specifically the view and the view model implementation is done in Pro. And then finally we show you how to hook commands. Then we have a few new framework elements that came out in ArcGIS Pro release 1.4. And Uma is going to show us some of those. And then last, you'll see the gallery plugin, one of the new framework elements that are fairly impressive and useful. So to asynchronous programming, as you know, ArcGIS Pro is a multi-threaded 64-bit application. That's already a big advantage over if you used to use ArcObjects in ArcMap. We always ran into memory issues. Those virtually don't exist anymore in Pro, as long as you have enough physical memory. Important asynchronous programming patterns for the SDK is the async and await pattern. I'm going to show you by example shortly how that's being used. And then also using the Pro framework's QTask. And again, I'll show you that by example. The ArcGIS Pro internal threading model, ArcGIS Pro is multi-threaded. It incorporates the latest asynchronous language features from Microsoft. It implements a threading infrastructure that's tailored to reduce complexity. As you can imagine, multi-threading is always very complex, so we try to make it simple. For add-in developers, you should only need to contend with 2 threads. On one side, you have the GUI thread, the graphical user interface thread. And on the other hand, you have a single specialized worker thread that we refer to as the main SIM thread, or MCT. And you can see there's plenty of acronyms here. SIM stands for Cartographic Information Model. So internally, ArcGIS Pro uses a large number of threads for rasterizing, rendering, data loading, geoprocessing. All this threading is all isolated from the API. So Pro delegates to the internal threads on the API's behalf. So this actually simplifies the coding and ensures consistency of the Pro state. And we'll see that in some examples coming up. So we have mainly 3 categories of methods in ArcGIS Pro. We have coarse-grained asynchronous methods. These can be called from any thread. Then we have finer-grained synchronous methods. These must be called from within a QTask framework. And I'll show you that shortly by example. And then non-API.NET methods can be called from system threads as you wish. So if you have any need for having multiple threads where you perform your own workflows, you're free to do so. We also have synchronous methods. These must be called on the GUI thread only. And these type of methods are usually associated with WPF and user interface updates. So for example, if you say open a project, that's one of the calls that is actually asynchronous, that's actually synchronous, but you have to call it from the user interface thread. And clearly there's not much else you can do at this time. So now to coarse-grained methods. They can be called from any thread. Typically, they are invoked from the UI thread. They execute in the background on Pro internal threads. And we use the async and await semantic for that. And by the way, if you're not familiar with async and await, that's a pattern that's used by the C# language in Microsoft.NET, so you can read up on that. And the Visual Studio compiler, needless to say, the development environment supports that out of box, and I'll show you that in a second as well. And then the aggregation of these methods into larger coarse-grained asynchronous method is not encouraged. And I'll show you later why that is the case. But for the time being, just take my word for it. Below you see two samples. First, we add a geodatabase to our current project. So you can see we have a geodatabase path. That's the path to the .gdb folder. We have an item factory that we use to create an item, and then we add that item asynchronously to the current project. And a second sample is to execute a geoprocessing tool, and here you see a sample of using the await semantic. So we say geoprocessing execute tool asynchronously, and you see a set of parameters are given. And then after that call is complete, we call zoom to the selection asynchronously, and we give it a time span to do so. So you'll see that in the sample in a little bit as well. And here we go. We go for the first sample snippet. This is the coarse-grained demo. So within Visual Studio, what I did is I used our templates to program this piece of code. And what I did is I created an add-in from scratch. Then I added a button to this add-in. And in the onClick method of that button, I call this method called Coarsegrained Methods. When we go into this method, you see there's two calls. There is a execute asynchronously geoprocessing task with a set of parameters. And then I zoom to the selection asynchronously. And this code won't work properly, and let's build it real quick. So I built a solution, I start the solution. This will bring up ArcGIS Pro in my debugger. Here we go. I select my sample project. And now my button that I programmed earlier is under a tab that's called Async Course. And when I click this button, let's see what the code does. So you can see it just called a method called Coarsegrained Method is done. However, when we look back at the code, you notice that I performed a selection here. Now, what happened? Why didn't it select? Why didn't it zoom to the selection? And why then did it show me the message box immediately? Well, the reason for that is because we didn't utilize the async and await patterns. So let's go back to ArcGIS Pro. If we zoom out here, you actually notice that a selection was performed. Here's Zurich, but because the call was an asynchronous call, the zoom to didn't work because the selection wasn't completed by the time I called the zoom to function. So let's make a few changes to our code so this will work. And in this specific case, I shouldn't have taken that candy just before the presentation. That was a mistake. So let me utilize the await keyword here. So what this await keyword does, it will actually wait for this asynchronous function to return. And you see now, we get a syntax error, it's all underlined, because the compiler now complains and it says, the await operator can only be used within an asynchronous method. And now it says you have to make this context here asynchronous. So what I can do is I can utilize the compiler help and say, make the containing scope asynchronous. And if you look very closely, you notice that all it did is it inserted the async keyword into my coarse-grained methods. So now I have an asynchronous function. So the function I'm working on now has itself become asynchronously and will run in the background. Now, let me make this one asynchronous as well. No, I wait. So I wait for the result of the selection as well. And now when we run this again, let me start the debugger. Everything should be executed in sequence just as needed. So first, we should see the selection, then we should see the zoom to, and then we should see the message box. So I click on the button. So here's the selection, it was completed. Now it zooms to the selection. So we should see Switzerland shortly. There's Switzerland, there's Zurich that I selected, and then it showed me the message box with a completed message. So now what we did is, now you say, well, why does this have to be asynchronous? Well, I programmed my own asynchronous method here. That means when I call onClick for my user interface, since my method is asynchronous, the onClick will return immediately. It will not wait until all my operations are complete. They will operate asynchronously in the background. So my user interface is still responsive. And that's one of the big advantages when you use ArcGIS Pro. So now let's go back to the slides. So now here are some fine-grained synchronous methods. These must be called from within the QTask context. There's a much greater number of fine-grained methods and classes. There is no async and await semantic here. And everything runs on the MCT, the main SIM thread or the main cartographic information model thread. And these methods are designed for aggregation, and you can aggregate those into your own coarse-grained asynchronous methods. So that's a mouthful, but in essence what it means is, if you write your business logic and you have a lot of functions where you perform selections, spatial operations, overlays, buffers, whatever, you want to perform those asynchronously in the background, and you want to create your own coarse-grained asynchronous methods for that. So your business logic for your spatial business operations, for your spatial workflows, you would put all this into one method, and that's what we're going to take a look at. Now, it's in the context of a QTask run method, as you see here from the sample below. So in this sample, what we do is we find the active parcel layer. Then we take the first layer. So this assumes that I have the correct project open. And then I set up a query filter, and I specify in the query filter a where clause, the fields to return, and then I perform a selection on those parcels that fulfill that requirement. So what is QTask? So the Pro Frameworks has a custom task scheduler. So it's used to run synchronous ArcGIS Pro SDK methods in the background. And all synchronous methods are listed in our API reference in our documentation like this. You can see the IntelliSense. This method must be called on the MCT use QTask.run. And they all these methods that have this requirement that they must be run in the context of QTask.run will also throw an exception that tells you that they are running on the wrong thread. We'll see that in a second. So here's an example of some synchronous methods in Pro. Get spatial reference, query extend, set definition. Those are members of the feature layer class. And then any kind of geometry operation. So for all this, you have to utilize the syntax that is specified below in this little code snippet. So now let's go to the fine-grained methods. And I have a little sample for that. So first what I did here is I don't run it as I just specified in the context of my QTask. So what happens if I build this, let me rebuild the solution and I run it, it will actually throw an exception. Let me run it. There we go. So this is the fine-grained demo. So if I click on it and I step over this, you can see it immediately returned, and now I have my try catch to catch the exception. And if we look at the exception, you can see the method or property must be called on the thread this object was created on. So that's the wrong thread exception that I have. So this has to be the trigger for me to run this method from within the context of a QTask. So let me uncomment. I already have the code snippet right here. Let me uncomment this line and this line here. So now you can see the only difference is when you look at my specific code snippet, the only difference is I added the await QTask.run method around, and then if you're not familiar with the syntax, this is referred to as a lambda expression. I could also reference another method here that I call explicitly, some kind of an action method, but in my case, I just utilize a lambda and then I specify the contents of my code within that lambda context. So now let's run this whole method again. And now, needless to say, I expect it to work properly without throwing any exceptions. Asynchronous. And as you can maybe not see is when I click that button, you see while my process was going on, I clicked on the tab up above and the user interface was still responsive. So that's because the async find demo button was executed asynchronously in the background, and the user interface returned to me immediately, and so it's still responsive. So it's one of the big advantages of the multi-threading capabilities in the ArcGIS Pro SDK. Okay, there's one more sample I want to show. If you have your own coarse-grained methods, what you want to do in these is you usually want to return a value. So I have a sample of this. Let me uncomment this. So this is my own coarse-grained method down here. Let's take a quick look. Going to the definition, you can see this method is of a type task, which is also what QTask is. QTask run is of type task. And in this case, I say I want to return an integer. In this case, I want to return the count of features selected. So as you can see here, I perform a series of operations. I zoom to my selection, and then finally, as the last step, I return the get selection count, the count of my selection, which is an int. So this is how you can program your own coarse-grained functions that actually return values. And then again, this is kind of the basic building stone from which you create your UI and the responsiveness of your UI in the ArcGIS Pro SDK. So you can see everything works in succession. And here we go, the selection count is 1. And you notice the selection itself took a little bit to render in the background, even so it already said selection count. The selection was there, it just didn't render. The rendering was done asynchronously in the background by what's referred to as the MCT, the main sim thread. Okay, so far so good. Let me close this. We're not going to need this anymore. back to the slides. So now, before we go into the UI design, let's talk a little bit about the MVVM pattern in Addins. The MVVM stands for Model View View Model, and variants of the same patterns are the de facto pattern for WPF, yet another acronym. It's Windows Presentation Foundation. It's kind of the user interface framework that Microsoft uses in .NET now. So MVVM is the de facto pattern for this. There's many frameworks available that support MVVM. There's a bunch of homegrown or hand-rolled ones, and then there's commercial ones, free ones. A Pro MVVM is built on a product that's called ActiPro, and we have a link here for you if you're interested. However, I'll show you in a second how we utilize it. And the basic pattern is we have a view model which is declared in DAML. DAML is the markup language that we use in ArcGIS Pro to define our user interface. And the view model is declared in DAML and implemented in code. And the view is referenced in DAML and implemented as a WPF user control. So when you see a WF user control, that's if you're not familiar with it, some people refer to it as XAML, because the file extension that's used for WPF user controls is XAML. And the model itself is optional. So to customize the Pro UI, you must use MVVM framework. Substitutes are really not allowed here. So I'll show that in a second how that works. So here's the MVVM pattern in Addins. It's used for many framework elements. Here's just some of them. Doc pane, pane, custom controls, embeddable controls, and property pages. And here we go. I'll show you how to create one real quick. And I utilize Visual Studio. I installed the Pro SDK on Visual Studio. Installs directly from the Visual Studio gallery. So now what I do is I create a new project, and if I install ArcGIS Pro SDK on my system, I can drill down under Visual C# or .NET to ArcGIS, and then there's an ArcGIS Pro Addins option. And now one of the options I want to do here is I want to do a module add-in. So that's my basic add-in that allows me to change the Pro user interface by adding additional control elements to it. So I'm going to click OK. And what it does, it creates my add-in. And you can see, I talked about the config.daml earlier. Everything gets stubbed out by my templates automatically. There's really nothing I have to do. By default, everything is added to a add-in tab, and we'll see that in a second. In this case, however, I want to add a doc pane just to show you how this works. So I say add new item. And I drill down to ArcGIS, ArcGIS Pro Addins, and I select doc pane. So now what the system does, it again stubs out all the code that I need for a doc pane. And we're going to run that in a second. I'll show you how this works. But first, let's take a quick look at the config.daml. We can see in the config.daml, it actually added a button here. And the button is called show doc pane 1 in our case. And if we go further down, we see here's a doc pane that was added. The doc pane has a caption called doc pane 1. And the doc pane here is linked to a view model class. So the class name for the view model, oops, that didn't work very well, is doc pane 1 view model. Now, when you look at the right side is the template we just used already stubbed out the view model code for us too. So when I look at the right side, here's my viewModel.cs class, and there's already a whole bunch of code in there that does the basic operations that I need to do with my doc pane. And then finally, there's the content, which is the view of the doc pane, and this is linked to a class called doc pane view. And here's the XAML for this. If we double click on this, you can see It just loaded in the designer. Pretty much this is the doc pane. It's just a, an empty area with a little title on the top. And underneath, if you look closely, this is the XAML, the content of the control. You can see it puts some fillers in there for you. When we build this and run it, you will see that out of the box you get some built-in behavior. The reason for that is because the base class that is used for doc panes is a framework doc pane class that implements a whole bunch of behavior out of box. So if we take a look at this, it adds my new controls under the add-in button by default. I can change this, needless to say. But if you click on Show Doc Pane, you can see on the right side, here's my doc pane that was implemented. There's no content in there yet, but I can utilize the basic functionality that comes out of box. So I can float this window, I can auto-hide it, I can close it. So here I just closed it. So very easy utilizing our templates. You get most of the basic code that is required for your user interface designs out of box. Okay, there's a few multi-threading considerations now. If you program in a doc pane, in ArcGIS Pro Framework's managed threading model, the framework provides the QTask to guarantee that all UI actions happen in a sensible order without corruptions. And that's very important. Imagine you have to select items and then you have to render the selection. So there has to be a sensible order to that. But updating UI collections from a worker thread or from a managed ArcGIS Pro thread requires locking. So this is a pattern that's actually standard in Visual Studio.net. If you work with worker threads, you always have to lock shared resources so they will work across threads. The recommended pattern for that, for updating collections from a worker thread, can be found in a Visual Studio.net binding operations helper class. And specifically, we talk about the enable collection synchronization function. You see a little code snippet below. And if you have lists or complicated user interfaces like grids, you will have to know this functionality and utilize it all the time. So now let's go to our bookmark demo. So what this is I created a doc pane from scratch. Then I added a drop-down list for all the current maps. And I added a list control that shows me the current bookmarks that we have in the system. And I want to show an image thumbnail for the bookmark and then also the name of the bookmark. I want to be able to select those bookmarks to zoom to that location. So let's take a look at the sample. So this is my view that you see up here. You can see I added a list control. So when I click on this, there's a combo box. On the bottom here, you have the XAML. The way MVVM works, it's utilizing data binding. So if you're familiar with Windows Forms, WPF, MVVM works a little bit different because instead of utilizing events, you actually loosely bind to your data properties. So the item source says here for my combo box is a property called all maps. And then the selected items, when I select an item on this combo box, is stored in selected map. If I go to my list box for my bookmarks, you can see very similar to that. I have an item source that binds to a collection called bookmarks. And then also I have something called a selected item where the selected bookmark is stored as soon as I click on this. So let's take a look at the view model. Because in the view model itself, we will have the corresponding properties. Specifically, let's start with the with a constructor of my class. And here's something that I talked to earlier, where you can see we use the binding operations class to synchronize the collections between the UI, because both my collections of, here's my maps collection and here's my bookmarks collection, both collections, when I update them, they are updated on a background worker thread. So I have to utilize the enable collection synchronization method from Microsoft. And I have to give it this log collection object, but it's just copy and paste, so you always do the same here. Now specifically I want to look at one of the properties, in this case my selected bookmark. I see I already have a breakpoint here, so this is very good. So let's build this sample here real quick. Okay, and then we run it in the debugger. There we go. Okay, click on the Add-in tab. Now this button here that starts up my, shows my doc pane is called Show Bookmarks. So when I click on that, you can see on the right side, it actually does show my bookmarks. And when I click my Get Maps button, it initializes everything. So now I have a list of my maps. Currently I only have one map, but I also have my bookmarks for this map. And as soon as I click on one of these, the property called selected bookmark that I specified as a binding element in the XAML is being updated by the user interface. So the user interface tells me now there's a new value for the bookmark, and I should actually be able to look at this new value. So if I look at this value, and I don't know whether you can read this, but very small characters, it shows home. So the current selected bookmark that I have is home. So now what I do here is in this code, I asynchronously zoom to this selected bookmark, and it did zoom to this area. So if I want to zoom to Oahu in Hawaii, then this should be Oahu. So if I continue, so you can see here it's zoomed to Oahu. So the binding allows us to link the graphical user interface that's defined in my WPF control to my code behind that's defined in my view model. If we take another quick look at the XAML here, we can also see I have a button defined. This is a very standard WPF button with some code behind. And when I implement a button in MVVM, let me scroll to this button method. What I can do is, instead of implemented an on-click callback method like I do in Windows Forms, I can actually bind it to a command property in my code behind class, and that command property has to implement something called an I command. An I command has two properties. It has an action routine and it has a true-false enable property. And I'll show you in a second how we utilize this. So let's stop the sample here. So a lot of times when you use ArcGIS Pro and you define your own user interface like a doc pane or your own workflows, you want to utilize existing Pro functionality. So there's a button somewhere that you want to utilize its function, but you don't want to write your own code. So to get any Pro controls I command, for example, you can use it in your add-in using the framework's get plugin wrapper method. And the following examples below shows you how to do this. So you can see in the first method here, I retrieve first the I command for create bookmark button. And then I use the framework application get plugin wrapper method to retrieve the I command from that plugin. And clearly I have to do some error checking here, make sure that the I command is not null. And then if it gets returned to me, I have two methods here. I can do, can I execute this, returns true or false. And then if I can execute it, then I can actually call execute, which does the code behind when I click that button. So here are more ways how you can add a button to your doc pane. The example here shows you how to use the close ArcGIS Pro command and put it in your doc pane. And a little bit below you can see how you can do a fixed zoom in. Relay command is an implementation of I command, which lets you specify your own implementation of execute and can execute. So if you want to override built-in functionality, then you can do that by using relay command. So now let's take a look real quick at our sample. What I want to do here is I want to add one additional function that allows me to create an additional bookmark. And I can just do this simply by enabling a little code snippet I have on the bottom. So here's my new bookmark button that I just added to the very bottom of my doc pane. It is bound to a new bookmark command. So needless to say, I don't want to write that new bookmark functionality myself. So if I look at the constructor of my view model, you can see that my new bookmark command gets initialized using the get plugin wrapper method. I have the unique ID for that specific plugin, and I return it as an I command. So now if I build this and I run this sample, you can see with very little effort, I just added additional functionality to my doc pane utilizing existing code from ArcGIS Pro. So here we go. Show bookmarks. Let me get my maps. So here's the new bookmark button right here. So if I click on this and, well, I guess I want to zoom somewhere else. So if I click here and I say, this is my pond bookmark. And I guess my refresh code is not working properly, but now you can see with a little bit help, you can see the pond bookmark is here available as well. So very little code, hooking a pro command allows you to quickly improve your functionality of your workflows. All right, so now we're looking at framework elements, and Uma is going to show us about framework elements.
Thank you, Wolf. Let's talk about framework elements in Pro. The list in this slide gives you a collection of all the framework elements provided by Pro. They're all extensibility points in an add-in that you can use in your development. All these framework elements and their attributes, they get defined in your config.damo, as Wolf mentioned. You can see a code snippet here for that. An important thing to remember is you can use an add-in to alter or modify functionality in another add-in. So your add-in could pretty much just inject a new button into a tab group of another add-in. So the Pro SDK offers Visual Studio item templates for pretty much all those framework elements that we talked about. It's a good starting point with your code behind files, config definition, and XAML files. So here I want to talk about and focus on a few new framework elements that we've provided for you at 1.4. It's the burger button, circular animation, message label, a search text box, and a waiting cursor. These elements, they provide an extra polish to your UI development work. So if you have to use any of these elements, be sure to add a reference to the ArcGIS Desktop Framework controls namespace. I've given that in the snippet below in this slide. Over here, I want to focus just a minute on the burger button because it has a little extra implementation details. A burger button is pretty much a context menu. You define it in demo. That's the first code snippet over here. In this case, this burger button, it has two buttons linked to it, outline button and a gallery button. We'll see this in a demo shortly. And then the next step is you bind an instance of this context menu to the pop-up menu attribute of your burger button in your XAML. It's quite a mouthful, but we will see this in the demo. And the last bit, you implement your two context menu buttons using the framework's button class, onClick method. So let's go ahead and add these controls and see exactly how they work. So here I have Pro open here. This is the exact same bookmark doc pane that Wolf just showed. I have added these new framework elements to this doc pane. I have added something called a burger button, a search text box, circular animation, and a message label. So if you see on the top right-hand corner over here, this is your burger button. It's pretty much just a menu for settings and other advanced features. So if I hover over it, you can see that it has a tooltip. It says change the view. So now I'm going to click on this. I pressed the two options you can see, outline and gallery. So first, I think I'm going to disable a few breakpoints. Oh, good, I've already done that. Okay, so I'm going to click on the outline context menu. And you can see that I can see my list box with the bookmarks in an outline view. Now I can switch it back to the gallery view using the gallery option. So now I'm going to go back to my code to see how I implemented that. So this is the same solution that Wolf was working on. This is my config.damo. Notice that I have defined a menu element within the menus group. This is my context menu. This is my burger button. You can see that it has a reference to two buttons within its menu, the outline button and the gallery button. So next, this is the view of my doc pane. This is where I've defined my list box. So now if you scroll down, you can see that I've defined my burger button right here. So notice that the pop-up menu attribute of the burger button, it has a binding to the context menu, and it has a tooltip that said change views. So now how did I implement that? So if you scroll up, if you're familiar with WPF, there I've created two data templates, a gallery view and a list view. All it is really it's defining the UI experience. What is a gallery view? It has a thumbnail, it has a little tooltip, and a text. And over here, this is another data template that defines the list view of the exact same list box containing the bookmarks. So once I've defined the two data templates, now the last step, I go into my list box that contains all the bookmarks, and I've implemented a very simple WPF data trigger. What it has is it has a binding to a bookmarks view type property. So when you click on that button and you say outline, this property, the bookmarks view type, is set to list, and I am displaying a list template. And when it's set to gallery, it's displaying a gallery template. So I'm going to go ahead and add these breakpoints here so you can see this in code. So right here now, when I change this to outline, my breakpoint right here. So now you switch to gallery, you can see that it's just calling the onClick method behind that button. It's setting the view type to gallery, and it's displaying the appropriate data template to view it. So the next thing I want to show you here is, I'm going to open the project pane. I'm going to add a new map to Pro. So when I add a new map to Pro, there is quite a bit of system activity. And when this is happening, I'm going to display a circular animation control. You can see that right here on the top. So this is indicating system activity. And once the map has drawn in Pro, I'm just hiding that control. That's the circular animation control. So now that I've added a new map, as you can see, there are no bookmarks in it. So now if I select the new map, you can notice that my list box control disappears and I get an informative message saying, please open a map with bookmarks. So now I can open my crimes map again, and you have your bookmark control and the label disappears. And I want to show you one more thing. Right here above the list box, I have a search text box. You would have seen this while you work with Pro. This is the exact same search text box that we have now provided you in your add-in development work. So over here, I can type in, suppose I have many bookmarks. For example, I'm going to see, do I have a police station bookmark? So I type that and I click this, and you can see that the police bookmark, Police Central Precinct bookmark is selected, and my bookmark has, my map has zoomed to that. So that has been implemented again in XAML. You can see that right above the list box right here. So this is my search text box. It has a lot of attributes, but the most interesting one over here is the text attribute. I have a binding to a search text property defined in my view model, and that's where I'm performing the search functionality. So that's it about the framework elements. Let's go back to the slides. And I want to focus now on the gallery framework element. It's a container control, and it has a very rich representation of data, as you can see in the screenshots over here. And it's very customary to give a little thumbnail of the item inside the gallery. When you have too many items in the gallery, you can expand it using the little expand arrow at the bottom. The contents are usually populated at runtime, and the gallery derives from a gallery class defined by the Pro framework. So you can design this gallery using the gallery template. It comes with your ArcGIS Pro SDK templates. And there are two types of galleries. The one on the right, it shows you the bookmark gallery. If you can see the split button defined here on the ribbon. So when you click on that, the contents of the gallery gets exposed. So another type of gallery is the one on the left over here. It's the analysis tools gallery. And basically here, all the items are placed directly on the ribbon. So the SDK templates, we provide item templates for both these type of galleries. So in the important thing to remember about the first type of gallery that expands with a split button, the code initialization happens on the on drop down opened override. We will see that in the demo next. And when you add items to the gallery, you use the add method. And when you click on an item, you call the onClick method, and the gallery item is passed as the parameter. So this slide basically shows you a little more information on how a gallery is defined in DAMO. So the first snippet over here is a gallery definition in DAMO. This is where you get to define things like how many items you want in a row and how many rows you want. And then you make a reference to your XAML file where you design the appearance of the gallery. And at the bottom is a small code snippet of the XAML file. The main thing to note here is notice that the data templates key, it matches the data template file that you define in DAMO. So that's the connection. Okay, let's check the demo out now. So over here in Visual Studio, I have an add-in project type, and I've added a gallery item template straight out of the box using the Pro SDK. I've made a few little customizations so that it will display an inline gallery on the Pro ribbon. My gallery is going to contain a collection of web map items from ArcGIS Online. When you click on each item, that web map will open up in Pro. So the first thing here This is the config.damo, and you can see that the gallery is defined here. This is all done with the SDK, so things like the caption are easy to modify. The next thing is the web maps gallery class file. So this is my gallery. This is the one that's going to contain my web map items from ArcGIS Online. You can see that it inherits from the framework's gallery base class, and it implements the on dropdown opened override and the on click method. So the on dropdown override is what I'm going to initialize the contents of my gallery. So within this initialize method right here, I have a get web maps async method. This is my method. I have used the Esri HTTP client to communicate with ArcGIS Online to get web maps. I'm not going to go over that here, but Wolf is presenting a session on that tomorrow, so you can attend that to see how I wrote this method. So then I have an on-click method, very straightforward. When you click on the gallery item, it calls the open web map async method. I'm going to step into that method shortly. So let's start Pro and see how this looks. Now while Pro is starting up, I want to show one more thing. So I have initialized my collection of items. You saw that in the gallery class, and I've also coded the on-click method. But what about styling the gallery? So this is the default styling that comes with the Pro SDK. So it's really simple. It has a little image. The source of the image has a binding to an icon property, and it has a text box element binding to a text property. So luckily my web map item has these properties, so I'm just going to use the default styling provided by the SDK. So now I'm going to open my gallery project. It's pretty much an empty project right now. So notice the split button created right here. So I'm going to click on that. Now my initialize method is triggered in the on dropdown opened override. I'm going to step into that method, and you can see that my gallery has displayed. The styling is pretty cheesy. You can see that the thumbnails are pretty small, but you know it actually works. You click on this, you can see that it's calling the on-click method. Continue, and we'll step through this shortly. Actually, yeah, why not right now? So let's see. The first thing is I am calling the item factories create method. This is a Pro API method. I am passing in the ID of the web map item from ArcGIS Online, and then I'm specifying that it's a portal item. So with this call, I get an item object back. I'm going to step over that. And then I'm here calling the map factories create map async method. It accepts the item object, and I get an actual map object back. So then using this map object, all I'm doing here is creating a view pane to view and display the map object. So I'm going to continue. And Pro is drawing the map from ArcGIS Online. So now let's make this display a little better. So now I'm going to stop debugging. Now if you go into our XAML file, I'm going to comment out this default styling provided by the SDK. And I have a code snippet over here that does some custom styling. I'm going to comment this out. There you go. So let's look at this in detail. So it's very similar to the default styling. It just has a little extra polish to make it look better, hopefully. There is an image element again, and it has, you can notice that I have little extra styling here with some drop shadow effect. Notice that for the color, I'm using an Esri resource. And for the source of the image, I'm binding it to the thumbnail of the web map item on ArcGIS Online. And then when you hover over the item, I have a tooltip that I'm using the snippet of the web map. And then just like before, I have a text block that specifies the name of the web map. So now let's see how this looks. Going to disable my breakpoints. So that definitely looks much better. So when I hover over it, you can see that I get a little snippet with an extra descriptive text on what the web map is about. Yes, I'll try to do that again. There you go. So when I click on it, again, the streets web map opens up. So I'm not done yet. I have one more thing to do. So now I'm going to stop debugging. And I want to convert this gallery into an inline gallery. Very simple. You go into your config.demo. There is an inline attribute for the gallery reference over here. I changed that to true. Inline was false, and now it's true. Then since this is an inline gallery where all the items are displayed directly on the Pro ribbon, I'm going to initialize the contents of the gallery within the constructor. And then I don't need the on drop down opened anymore. So now let's see how that looks. There it is. Just with a few changes, I was able to change my gallery from a split button display to an inline gallery. So that concludes my demo on the gallery item. And back to the slides, and I think that's about it. I have a couple of slides with some information on other sessions that you might find useful. Perhaps you can take a picture of all these sessions that we provide on the Pro SDK. There is the one on Wednesday is the one that Wolf is presenting on ArcGIS Online that talks about communicating with Pro. And this is the couple of demo theater sessions, and we have an ArcGIS Pro SDK road ahead session coming up. And new this year, we actually have a instructor-led training class. It's called Extending ArcGIS Pro with Addins. It's a 3-day class coming up in April, and I just heard that there are some seats available still, so if you're interested, please register for that. And if you have any questions, we would like to answer them.
Yeah, I think I want to mention one more thing. The samples that you saw today, they are available in one or the other form on our ArcGIS Pro SDK website. If you search in Google for ArcGIS Pro SDK, you'll get to this landing page. And from here, you can reach the API reference, community samples, and our Pro concepts documentation. So all the samples you saw today, if you go to the samples, you will see that they're available here in one or the other form. And they're organized by namespace. And then when you go into this specific sample, you'll see pictures and documentation, how to build and how to run and use the sample. Data is available on the community samples page as well. And yeah, so let's go to the questions. Do we have any questions? There's a question. Slide before. That was an easy question. Thank you. Pay her $5 for that question. Yes, sir.
I understand with Pro you have less fine-grained objects that you can use versus ArcMap.
Yes.
Is there a list of which ones you can use and which ones you can't? How do you know which ones you can use?
The API so the question was, when do you know that a method is fine-grained versus it's coarse-grained?
I've just
Okay, so the question was from Arc objects moving to Pro.
Yeah,
Is
some of the objects are not
yeah.
built.
Well, no. The short answer is no. There's no comparison list. Yeah.
Just give it a shot, and
Yeah, we try to, if you want to know what functionality there is, I would look at the samples first and see what the samples provide. We try to provide samples for all the capabilities that we have. And, you know, you see the pictures, and not everything is equivalent with Arc objects, so there might be some differences. But, you know, the functionality might be there in a different form, so.
well, I was looking at the QTask, and I was thinking, oh, cool, I can just take whatever one I want and put it in that. But I can't do that.
No, you're not. Now, when it comes to some of the API functionality, it's virtual equivalency. Like if you look at the geometry API, it's very similar. There, you know, pretty much whatever there was in Arc objects is also available in one or the other form in Pro. But you know, many of the other APIs are not quite on par. All right, thank you very much. If you have any other questions, you can come forward after that, and we'll try to answer. Or you see us on the Pro Island showcase. Thank you.